Hey there, and just doing a real quick video, not as long as my other ones, just on a quick thing, and that is, what's in your camera bag? And so for 2023, this is typically, if I'm gonna go on a photo trip specifically, this is typically what I bring in my camera bag, my camera setup. There's one camera though that's not in this setup, and that is my video camera, which is recording me right now, and that's a Lumix G7. And I actually just bought this camera literally a week ago. Now, why did I buy a camera that's what, 6-7 years old? 2 weeks ago? Great video camera. I'm not really using it for stills, but for a compact, lightweight, second video camera when I'm not using, you know, my Sony A7R III as my primary, it makes a good secondary video camera. And the quality's great. So it works just fine for me, so that's what I chose to use. But let me go over my bag a little bit here. Now typically it just depends on what I'm doing and where I'm going. But for the most part, this is my main kit. I'm primarily a Sony shooter. I used to shoot Canon way back in the day, and at that point in my career, when I was primarily doing portrait photography, wedding photography, and commercial work, I had pretty much every L-series Canon lens from 14 millimeter all the way up to 300 millimeter 2.8 and everything in between. So it was a really great kit for me. But since I kind of retired from the photography business in 2011 and just basically pursuing my own artistic photography, this is what I choose to carry on if I'm going to go on a big photo trip. Now, if I'm going to travel light, obviously this is not what anyone would call light. So, but you know, I pick and choose little pieces of gear depending on what I'm going to be doing. So just because there's so much interest in film nowadays, let me start with the film side of things. So for the most part, for my film photography, I typically go with medium format. If I want to travel light, I'll just go with the old classic Holga. Very simple toy plastic camera. It's not for high quality shots. It's for fun little grab shots and just kind of something with an artistic kind of feel to it. That's what I choose to pick up. It's not too common I shoot with it, but because it weighs nothing, it's really easy to throw in my bag and take along the way. So that's kind of as a secondary. But mainly if I'm going to shoot film, this is what I shoot with here. And this is the Hasselblad 500cm, and my family has a very large Hasselblad gear set, just because my dad and my grandfather both shot nothing but Hasselblad pretty much for their photo careers. So pretty much every single lens that Hasselblad makes, we have one. In the previous video where I interviewed my dad, he even brought out some of his favorite, you know, what his favorite Hasselblad is. But pretty much everything that Hasselblad has made in lenses, we own one pretty much. And that's kind of nice. And we kind of trade and borrow and go back and forth between my dad and I. But the 500cm is definitely my favorite. Now I choose something a little bit different on mine. Most of the time with Hasselblads, you'll see just a flip up, you know, waist level viewfinder on the Hasselblads. And those are terrific. And that's what my dad prefers. I actually prefer this here. This is a metered prism. So this prism here actually has a meter in it. And that's how I prefer to shoot rather than carry a separate handheld light meter, which I do have one. I have a really nice Gaussian that I use from time to time. But for the most part, yeah, I stick with a built-in camera meter if I can get it. And the nice thing with this one, I just drop it on and away I go. The really great thing about this camera is really simple, great quality pictures, you know, and because I've been using it for so long for weddings and portraits, it's like second nature to me. I really like the way the EV system lines up here, and that's how this meter works. So you just set your film speed right in here, you adjust, you know, what lens maximum f-stop you have, and away you go. You just set up your scene, you press and hold this little button, and it gives you an EV reading. And then you take that EV reading and you match it to this ring on the lens. Now in these older style Hasselblad lenses, it's set. So what you do is you press down on this little ring here and then you adjust it to the proper EV. For example, for really bright sunny day, that would be EV14. That's pretty typical. That's kind of like the Sunny 16 rule is basically what it is. So for example, right here, once you set that EV at 14, the f-stops and the shutter speed are in sync. So it doesn't matter what choices of f-stop or shutter speed combinations you choose, every single one of those choices would be correct exposure. Because of course, every time you move, it just adjusts that setting and that light value. So for example, if I'm shooting at, f8, it's going to be 250th of a second. If I'm shooting at f16, it's going to be a 60th of a second. So it just falls right into the line. The other thing I really like about the older Hasselblad lenses is this depth of field guide. So as you turn this ring, after you've set the EV, when you rotate the ring, this guide will show you how much of your focus is, how much depth of field is going to be in the field. So when you focus, let's say you're right in here, because of my f-stops I've chosen, at this point, everything from basically about 11 feet to 25 feet will be in focus. And these red kind of guides will adjust depending on what f-stop I choose. So let's say if I bring this down to 5.6, okay, from that point, everything from 8 feet to 9 feet will be in focus with that choice setting and where I go here. So it gives you a really great, really quick, at a glance, view to know where your depth of field lies. That's really great when you're doing landscape photos and you want to know, okay, where's my foreground, where's my background, am I getting that in? So you can really quickly dial those things in. And that's my Hasselblad. Now, the lens I have on it right now is more of a portrait lens, where what I love as a portrait lens on the Hasselblad, and that's 150 millimeter, and this is an f4. So it's, good fast lens, it's wonderful. This is the normal lens for it, and as you see, this is more of a modern Hasselblad lens, where the EV system is not locked down. You have your shutter speed and your f-stop are both on separate dials. So if you want to do EV ratings, you would set it in, press this lock button, and then you'd shift both dials up or down, because when you press this button in, it locks those two together, and they move together as one. And then you just, same thing, dial in your EV rating right here, and then work with it from there. But another really great lens I keep in my kit. Okay, now if I'm going to if I don't want to travel with the Hasselblad stuff, and I want to go for 35 millimeter or just throw a 35 in the bag if I'm going to shoot film that day, this is my camera of choice. Even coming from a background of shooting Canon film cameras and Contax film cameras, my favorite 35 millimeter camera to use personally has always been the Pentax. I love the way they feel. The lenses are terrific. There are so many great ones out there. And I think for the most part in film cameras, a lot of times they got kind of a bad rap just because, they weren't a professional level camera. While that's not the case at all. They made great quality camera bodies. This one here is one of the last film cameras they made in the 35 millimeter realm for the more professional or serious amateur shooter. This is called the MZ-S. It's autofocus, it's 6-segment matrix metering, it has a built-in winder in it. It is just a really, really solid camera. And to this day, this is still one of my favorite 35 millimeter film cameras. And, it's solid as a rock. I've been using it for years and hundreds of, I would say hundreds of rolls of film through this. Maybe not 1,000 at this point, but darn near close to it. But just a solid performer. It's an all titanium body, so it's really sturdy. It's really durable and just one of my favorites. Usually for this camera, I really only keep one lens on it, and that's the 50 millimeter 1.4. It's a Pentax autofocus lens, but this Pentax SMC FA 1.4 is just my favorite Pentax lens. I pretty much just keep it on this camera. I have a couple ones I just picked up, just basic lens, nothing fancy at all, just a really inexpensive little Pro Master, which is an aftermarket brand. It's pretty much a Tokina, it's a Tokina made lens, though it's branded Pro Master. But just good solid zoom lens. It's just a 28 to 80, just a very standard zoom. Nothing fancy. It's just a 3.5 to 5.6, so it's not real speedy. And for a small compact telephoto, there's this little 80 to 200 Pentax lens. And just very simple, you know, nothing fancy, just a small telephoto. Just because I don't really need anything really fancy with these, because I'm not doing any really serious work with them, really. It's just fun shooting. If I do anything kind of artistic, I usually, same thing with the Pentax, I keep the 50mm lens on it. Going on to my Sony gear, which is definitely where I keep the most of my gear budget. I have everything from, I try and for the most part, I stick with Carl Zeiss lenses, just because coming from the Hasselblad and just knowing the quality of Zeiss, I've always stuck with it. And that was the main reason I switched to the Sony camera system, was really these two lenses right here. I have, same thing, because we kind of have a shared family camera collection, I have a lot more Zeiss lenses I have access to. And these are for the old Contax, Yashica Contax system. So these are all for the Contax camera, 35mm, but these are the two favorites of mine. And this is the Distagon 18mm f4, and this is a pretty unique lens. This is one of the older ones that was made in West Germany, and it's just incredibly sharp. It's definitely one of my favorite lenses of all time, and that was being able to use this lens and this one on the Sony when I first started shooting the Sony Alpha cameras. That's what really made the difference to me. I wanted to be able to use all of my old Zeiss lenses. The cool thing is, though, too, because of the Sony, I drop an adapter on here, I can use the Pentax lenses, I can actually put the Hasselblad lenses on my Sony, though I have not tried that yet. I'm actually tempted to go pick up an adapter for it and give it a shot and see how it goes. Just because getting the vintage look of film lenses on the Sony, I want to try out a little more because I enjoy using these on my Sony so much. And that's the Distagon. It's an 18mm f4 Distagon. And then this is the 50mm 1.4 planar. And this is also another Carl Zeiss 1.4 solid performing normal lenses. I love it as a good standard, you know, walking around lens for everyday use. But for more my serious use, that's when I bring these guys out. So I have two Sony telephotos. I use the 70 to 200 f4G, and same thing. I didn't go with the 2.8s because I'm not really working where I'd need an f2.8 really. You know, maybe someday I'll change it. But I wanted a lens and system that was a little more lightweight. Yeah, I know, looking at this table, it's kind of hard to believe. But when it comes to just hauling around my Sony stuff, I want it pretty light and quick and agile. So I went for an f4 for most of my things here. So this is the 70-200 f4. This one here, this is my biggest lens, and same thing, I do not schlep this around with me too often. This is the 200 to 600. And this is a 5.6 to 6.3. It's image stabilized, but just a solid performer. And from time to time, when I do want a really big telephoto lens, this takes the cake, and I really love it. I know a lot of Sony shooters sometimes will just go with the 100 to 400 and then put a 1.4 extender on it. But I really prefer the native glass rather than put a telephoto extension on them. They just, for me, it feels a little better, but that's just me. I'm picky like that. And these are my favorite lenses. Still like this one, but I wouldn't say it's my favorite. I use it quite a bit, but these are my favorites. So if I'm gonna go travel light, I usually go one of two ways. I either bring these two lenses here, and this is the Zeiss, the 24 to 70 f4, or I'll bring the Zeiss, and this is the 16 to 35 f4. Both constant aperture f4 lenses, so they are good and bright. And the nice thing with digital, I can easily bump up the ISO. I'm using these on a Alpha A7R III, which is my camera of choice right now. But I started with the Alpha 7R, and that was my first Sony I shot with. And I added an Alpha 7 II, and then I just kind of waited and finally picked up the R3, which I'm really, really pleased with. But the R3 and the Zeiss lenses, they knock it out of the park every time. The sharpness, the clarity, just they have a look to them that's really unique. A lot of times too, you'll hear people talking about Leica lenses having a certain look. I've always felt that Zeiss has a look to them. You can tell a Zeiss lens in how wonderful it is. And I know that sharpness and clarity is really being hammered by Sony's G Master series, which are exceptional lenses. But for me, I've always just had a thing for the Zeiss. I like the way they portray colors. I like the way that they just have a nice natural feel and look to them. So I've stuck with them. So yeah, if I want to go light, 60 to 35, 24 to 70. And those two lenses become a single kit where I'm just bringing basically one other lens with me. Or I'll go the opposite direction and I'll go to just primes. Or I'll carry all four. Two favorites here. Very simple, just a Zeiss 55mm 1.8. This is just the typical little Zeiss lens that for a while, I think you could even get this on a kit on the Sonys. I'm not sure if they're doing that anymore, but just a plain old 55 1.8. And that's just one of my favorite lenses because it's just fun to use. It's really bright, use it in dark places really easily. Just a great old lens. But this is my favorite. So this is the Zeiss 85mm 1.8. And I had basically this lens for my Contax camera, but it was a 1.4. So Contax and Zeiss had a 85mm 1.4, and that was my favorite lens of all time. And unfortunately, when I switched to Canon, that's one of the ways I afforded my Canon is I sold a lot of my really nice stuff, and one of them was that lens, which now, of course, I wish I hadn't sold it. But, hindsight's 20/20, right? So this is the 85 1.4 or 1.8. Love the lens. It's just a great performer. I know that like the Sony G Master, it does outperform it in sharpness, no doubt. But I just like the feel and the look and the quality that this gives me. And also, this is a lot lighter than the big G Master 1.4 that Sony makes as well. So I kind of like it, quick, light, and agile. And so, this is what I choose to use. So anyway, if you have any questions about my camera bag or what I'm using or why I use it, just drop in a comment. I'd be happy to help. Love photography and love camera gear and love to talk about it more. Anyway, that's about it. Thanks for listening to me drone on, and I'll talk to you soon, and thank you so much for watching. Okay, bye.